Hi, everyone. I'm John Penrose, CEO at Agile Brain. It's my pleasure to welcome you here tonight for an informative talk by a dear friend of mine and a colleague. Also, we'll have a QR code on the screen. If you want to take an Agile Brain assessment, it takes 3 minutes, and it reveals your emotional state. So be prepared. It's my great pleasure to be here. It's my great pleasure to introduce Dr. J.D. Pincus. I've known him for 25 years, and I've worked closely with him for the last 5 years, doing something really special. JD is a PhD from the University of Connecticut in social psychology and one of the foremost thinkers on human emotions. So without further ado, let me introduce JD.
Thanks very much, John. Why we do what we do, WWD for short, the emotional needs that drive us. So why do we do what we do? Right? What are the reasons that we set goals for ourselves? We make sacrifices. We sometimes even sabotage our own success. If you've ever wondered why it is that you keep making the same mistakes over and over again, you're not alone. Philosophers have struggled with this for thousands of years. Psychologists have wrestled with this for about 150 years, in the process producing hundreds, literally, of reasons of why we do what we do. And in every case, it always reflected the context, the zeitgeist, the sort of where people were coming from at the time. So let's say you were a neurologist in Vienna and during the Victorian era, like Sigmund Freud, then you might say that everything, all of our behaviors and actions are driven by the need for eros, because that's what he saw in his practice, and that's what made sense to him in the context in which he lived, right? He wasn't entirely wrong, but it wasn't entirely right. If you've ever been a wolf of Wall Street, if you've ever known one, then you know that all of our decisions are driven by what? A balance of fear and greed, right? If you were a psychologist, a humanist in the 1960s, kind of building the me generation of the 1970s, like Abraham Maslow, you'd probably say that we're all climbing a ladder to self-actualization. Interestingly, Maslow thought only 1% of us would ever get there, which is kind of a pessimistic assessment. I think we actually we have higher hopes. If in the 1970s, the era of personality theory, everyone knows there's sort of Myers-Briggs here. I'm sure you've done it at some point. And those folks would say your Myers-Briggs profile determines what you do and how you act and your decisions you make. I'm an INTJ, that's why those are highlighted, I guess. So I guess I have to do whatever INTJs do, right? Which is probably what I'm doing right now, right? It's an INTJ kind of thing. Or maybe it's the culture you were raised in, or maybe it's your unique set of personal values, right? Maybe it's any of those things. It could be hundreds of things. The question is, why, right? Why? That's what we really want to get at with this. This is about motivations, about emotional needs, the why behind your behaviors, right? The question of motivation is an important one. The only person who wouldn't care about motivation would be somebody who's maybe a behaviorist, like B.F. Skinner. It's everything stimulus and response, doesn't really care what's going on between your ears. For everybody else, we care very desperately about why, right? What's the motive? When you think about any of these really horrible cases, and I'm sorry to do this to you all, but who's our most recent celebrity, Luigi Mangione, who made himself a little ghost gun and crept up behind Brian Thompson, the CEO of United Healthcare, and shot him. Why, right? Did he know him? No. Did he have coverage to United Healthcare and had a claim denied? Nope. Did he even have a position, a coherent position on the ethics of managed care? He didn't have that either. His manifesto basically says, I'm not an expert in this. So why did he do it, right? We think about the most vile and extensive mass shooting in American history. It happened on the Las Vegas Strip. Stephen Paddock brings an arsenal up to his hotel room on the 30th floor and shoots down at concert goers, killing 60 people, injuring 800. No motive has ever been established for that, right? Nothing. Staying in Las Vegas, 2 weeks ago, New Year's Day, guy packs a Cybertruck full of explosives, goes in front of the Trump Hotel and blows it up. He was an active duty Green Beret, by the way. No motive, He had no grievance against Trump. He had no grievance against Elon Musk. And staying with Trump for just another moment, if we go back to last summer, he was almost assassinated. Thomas Crooks, again, motive is still unclear to investigators. No motive, right? So in all these cases, let's call these men without motives, right? We're going to come back to them later. Do we really think there was no motive at all? I think there is a motive. It's just not a rational motive. It's not a motive that makes sense to us, in any kind of analytical, rational way, right? But if we think about it in terms of emotions, in terms of their emotional needs, the emotional needs that weren't being met for them, then I think we're going to get a little closer to answering why it is they did these things. Fortunately, it's not all bad news. Not all of our motivations are that dark. We want to start a family. We want to give to charity. We want to give back. We want to create a legacy. All of those good things, right? Those are all motivations too. Why do we work, for instance, right? Well, economists would say it's because, I owe, so off to work I go, like the bumper sticker says, right? And that's definitely part of it, is there's necessity. But why do we work so hard, right? We don't have to work as hard as we do for most of us. We work hard because we have a need for autonomy. We want to control our work, right? We have a need for immersion. We like the feeling of getting lost in our work, and kind of the time passes rapidly and we don't even know it's happening. We look up and we've created something amazing, right? We want to have a meaningful achievement. There's the camaraderie with our peers. There's the sense of duty to our family, the sense of duty to our team. There's all these different reasons. There's hundreds of reasons why people do what they do. And each of us essentially has a fingerprint. And I won't bore you with the math, but we've done the math, and there's nearly an infinite number of combinations of the key motives. So any given person at any given time can be motivated by something completely different than the person next to them. So let me give you a personal example of this from my own life. I'll bring you forward the picture of my bride, Sherry, here, and me at our wedding. We're both from New England. We got married in Stockbridge at Chesterwood. Lovely day, lovely wedding. Settled outside of Boston in a suburb, had 2 children, a variety of pets. Why did we do it? Well, out of caring, inclusion needs, duty to be near family, like driving distance to our parents. Probably some degree of safety was involved as well. So to give you an inkling of some of the kinds of concepts we're talking about. My younger brother grew up in exactly the same place I did, same parents, same genetics, same everything. And he went to Georgetown, went to Georgetown Law, got his degree, passed the New York bar. I thought he was going to become a corporate lawyer or something. Nope, left the country and decided that he was going to join a different tribe. And here he is at his wedding. He married a woman from Yemen. He has 8 children there. He lives on the other side of the world, driven by what? Autonomy, driven by a higher purpose, driven by the need to join, to be included in a different tribe, right? So very similar people down to the last detail with incredibly different motivations and incredibly different life outcomes. So what are these needs? Right? Let's get into actually what this book is about. These needs are essentially, motivation is about change, right? It's about wanting to change from one state to another. It's the concept of homeostasis, right? Things, you want to keep a balance or an equilibrium in your life, and all of your bodily systems are set up that way. When things go out of balance, it's generally because there's a stressor that comes into the mix, and that causes you to need to change, right? So change has 2 questions to answer about change. The first is, where in my life do I want to make a change? Right? The next question is, when? At what stage do I want to make a change? Right? So the first question we can answer like this. There are 2 axes that define the domains of human life. One is the axis between individualism and communalism. That's sort of, I can be concerned with myself or I can be concerned with other people. Right? That's self versus social. The other axis here is materialism versus spiritualism. Right? I focus on sort of things and work and money, or I can be focused on ideals. Right? I don't think it's an accident that those 2 dimensions, those 2 axes, happen to also describe world cultures. They're the dominant axes that differentiate world cultures. Of course, the United States is the sort of poster child for individualism. Southeast Asia is the poster child for communalism. Materialism we associate with Europe and America, Japan, etc. in the northern hemispheres. and spiritualism, sort of indigenous spirituality with the southern hemispheres, is the reason the Pope spends so much time in the lower half of that picture. That's the sort of natural home of spirituality, right? So again, I don't think it's an accident that these axes happen to map onto world cultures. And again, it's not my idea to come up with this. It was an insight, but it was validated. At least 12 different systems, world systems of philosophy, basically say that these are the 4 domains of human life, including all 5 major world religions. So we're on good authority here, right? The next question is about the stages, right? About time, when. This we borrow from Aristotle's metaphysics. So Aristotle had this idea that, if you had Home Depot comes to your house and they drop off a big bundle of lumber, right? At that point, it's in a state of pure potential or being, right? Once you have a design, an architect, a builder, and they decide, I'm going to make a shed out of this, or I'm going to make a fence out of this, and they begin to build, it's now becoming, it's doing, it's becoming, right? That's the next stage of being. Then, at the end of the day, the thing is done. You've got a shed, you can move your lawnmower into it, and lock the door. That's a state of having, right? So being, doing, and having, as the famous Zig Ziglar sales trainer once said, you got to be before you can do, and do before you can have. And he was quoting Aristotle, whether or not he knew it. So now I'm going to have to switch gears here to show you the video. So we have a very nice video. It's only 40 seconds long.
4 domains of human life and 3 levels of striving form 12 human needs. We begin at the foundational level, our most basic needs. Once satisfied, we can progress upward. Our needs are like a pyramid, wider at the foundation and narrower on top. And the domains represent pairs of opposites, self and social, material and spiritual. This simple model accounts for every need concept in the history of psychology. And as we'll see, there's nothing so practical as a good model. Welcome to Agile Brain.
When you look through that pyramid, that rotating pyramid of 4 sides representing different domains of human life and the different levels representing levels of attainment, we end up with this. It's 12 needs, 12 emotional needs, right? We can kind of just run through these very quickly just to give you a sense for what we're talking about. Everything starts with the need for psychological safety, right? Maslow's model starts with that. All the models start with that. If you feel psychologically safe, you can begin to speak in your own voice. You can begin to sort of be your own person, sort of come out as who you truly are. That's authenticity. The only way to ever achieve your full potential is to speak in your own voice and really be who you are. There's no way to get there. You can't get there trying to sound like your professor, trying to sound like your boss, trying to sound like, God forbid, ChatGPT. That will not get you to potential, right? In the material domain, we're all basically toddlers. We want to know that we have permission and ability to use the new toy, the new software, the new machine. Once we have that, we can then use it and we get into a state of flow, right? Immersion. Time passes and we look up, we've done something wonderful and we've achieved success, okay? In the social domain, it all begins with inclusion, right? We need to feel accepted by our family, by our tribe, by our community. If we have that in place, that's our first opportunity to build one-on-one, deeper, intimate relationships. There's a lot of young adult fiction that intentionally violates this rule. Like the person from this side of the track states the person on that side of the track. The reason that that's compelling is because it's quite unusual. Generally, this is the way things progress. And then from a lifetime of doing good things, including others and being caring, we then receive respect, recognition, validation, affirmation, all of those good things in the social domain. In the spiritual domain, it all begins with justice, right? We need to know that good is rewarded and bad is punished. If we don't have that, we're not making any more progress in the spiritual domain, right? If we do have that in place, we can begin to think about restraining self-interest, for instance, which is the heart of ethics, right? The gray areas of life, like how much self-interest is too much self-interest. Once we've nailed justice and ethics, that's our first opportunity to kind of begin to contemplate a higher purpose, right? Approaching the divine, if you will. Who says that? Basically, every theologian ever, from Maimonides to Thomas Aquinas to Martin Luther King Jr., whose birthday we're about to celebrate. You cannot have a higher purpose. It's sort of disingenuous to try to say you have a higher purpose if you don't have a commitment and are living with justice and ethics, okay? So That's it. And now we'll play a little round of bingo. I'll just kind of show you where some of the major theories of motivation sit in here. So Maslow, as I mentioned, as safety. Above safety, remember his model from Psych 101? It was belonging, which we call inclusion. Above that, he had esteem, which we call recognition. Above that, he had self-actualization. We call that potential, right? Erik Erikson believed that we have a natural drive to develop our identity, right? That's authenticity. That's our authentic self. Csikszentmihalyi, everyone know flow theory, even if you're too afraid to try to pronounce Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi. Yeah, he's the one who came up with flow theory. And flow theory is all about immersion, right? John Bowlby, Mary Ainsworth did all that work about the secure base, the importance of a stable, caring environment for children to grow. And then the spiritual domain has been a more recent thing. Paul Bloom's work at Yale, Joshua Green at Harvard, even back to Kohlberg, Piaget, the whole concept of moral development, that it goes in stages. So they all covered that. And that's just sort of, scratching the surface. I've got a paper that kind of goes through and takes, these hundreds of these concepts and lays them into this model, leaving nothing on the table. So how do we know? Why? This is kind of all nice to know, right? It's sort of interesting. Well, does it matter, right? Well, I guess the question becomes, what happens if our emotional needs aren't met, right? Has anyone here ever felt psychologically unsafe, or felt powerless, or felt excluded or uncared for, or treated unethically or unjustly, right? That doesn't feel good. It feels bad, right? It doesn't just feel bad. It doesn't make you sad. It actually hurts, right? You actually suffer. And the truth is that that suffering is intense, and that suffering can actually haunt you for a long time. And we'll get into this in a second. Sigmund Freud, I think, put it best. He was very blunt sometimes. Unexpressed emotions never die. They're buried alive, and they will come forth later in uglier ways. So they don't go away. And what we try to do in our Anglo-Saxon New England tradition is to basically bottle them up, right? Stiff upper lip, keep calm and carry on. But that doesn't work. It only works for a little while, because those things, as Freud says, they don't go away. In fact, the way he's describing them sounds like something, right? It sounds like a thing that you bury alive that never dies and comes back ugly. Sounds a lot like a zombie, doesn't it? They become zombies. So the lesson here is, don't bury your emotional needs. Absolutely, never do that. And in a serious sense, they do a lot of harm. They can do you a lot of harm. And the next point here is really about the consequences. The consequences in some of these terrible stories we've heard, like the Romanian orphanages, or Harlow's monkey experiments, which are totally unethical. Basically isolating baby monkeys and seeing what happens. The way we treat prisoners in this country and put them in solitary confinement for years at a time. These things they're not just painful to the person experiencing them, they actually physically change the brain, and in many cases permanently. So this is an example, this is from the Romanian experience of a normal 3-year-old child on the left, and one sadly coming out of that experience with extreme neglect. There's no way to repair that, right? It does serious damage, and we need to take it seriously. So when I talk about emotional needs, it's not fluff, it's not just like a fun parlor game. This is real stuff that has real consequences. Another vector here that matters is, so far we're just talking about within the person, right? Just containing it within the person. It doesn't stay within the person. We know from the Framingham Heart Study that people's emotions are contagious. One happy person will make all the people around them a little bit more happy. One miserable person is going to bring everybody down, okay? But then there's the direct approach, which is violence, right? Like our Men Without Motives. I said they'd be back. They're back. Hurt people hurt people. People who have unmet emotional needs can actually go out and cause a lot of damage, cause a lot of violence, cause a lot of pain to a lot of people. So this is not a minor concern. End of the day, all this matters a lot, right? So why didn't they teach us this in school, right? Apparently this is a cottage industry now. What school doesn't teach you, why they didn't teach me this, why don't they teach it? Everybody wants to report on all the things they weren't taught in school. Well, the good news is we now have an assessment that in only 3 minutes on your phone can do a psychometrically valid measure of your emotional needs and give you an instant report right then and there, okay? So we're using that in schools. We're using that in Ukraine. We're using that in New York. We're using it in Massachusetts. It's getting out there, which is fantastic. Now imagine a situation where lots and lots of students, as they go through school, actually begin to become conversant with their emotional needs and those of others, right? What would that do? What if the schools themselves and colleges and workplaces and even governments could be reorganized around the concept that we are there to meet people's emotional needs, right? I think that'd be transformative. You know, let's get curious about our emotional needs, you know? Let's really try to understand why it is we're doing what we're doing. What are we really seeking, right? When you do that, you're going to see that your world changes quite dramatically for the better. Let's stop guessing about what emotional needs are, motivations are. Let's understand the map of what they are. Let's measure them. And ultimately, let's create a world where, you know, emotional needs are met for everybody.
Thank you. The question I have relates to the slides you were showing about the brain.
Yeah.
And the neurological changes, the physiological changes that occur. And that's in children. But what about adults? And is there any implication to people who are getting older, who are dealing with dementia or Alzheimer's or other issues? Where does the emotional part of this factor in?
Right. That's a good question. Well, first of all, we know in adults, you know, so this is children, it's really easy to see these dramatic effects, and they're particularly tragic because of that. But if you look at people who have spent time in solitary confinement, their hippocampus shrinks, their brain physically changes, and it doesn't bounce back. You've permanently changed their brain. So I think when people think about the way we punish people, we're not just doing what we think we're doing, we're actually doing something much, much worse. And that reminds me then of sort of the dementia and cognitive decline. The interesting thing about that is that sometimes what you get in those situations is a kind of a loss of frontal lobe activity and power, which can actually reveal emotions more readily. I think, though, there is always going to be a challenge with kind of getting at the emotional needs of people who are in cognitive decline. Although that is something that we have yet to explore, I think that actually would make a great pilot. We've done this Agile Brain with very old people. We've done it with people who are over 100 years old and gotten valid, you know, solid results. So it scales to the speed of the person taking it, which is lovely. And it gives us, I did it with AARP in a program that they did for the Hartford. So you can do this with older people. The question of dementia, like a diagnosed dementia, that's something that would have to be dealt with clinically, but I think we could do it. Yeah.
Is this an assessment tool that will be used for an individual that maybe lacks the emotional or intelligence or the ability to recognize their emotions?
The thing we bump into a lot, and I've gone to emotional intelligence conferences, I've spoken to all the greats in emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is actually a different thing. Emotional intelligence is all about recognizing the symptoms of need fulfillment. It's not the needs themselves, right? So if I feel sad and I'm aware that I'm sad and I'm aware that you're sad and can I do anything with that information? Can I make you feel better? You know, that's emotional intelligence. I'm angry. Am I aware that I'm angry? Am I aware, you know, that's emotional intelligence. It's great to be emotionally intelligent, emotionally aware. It's even better if you can go that next step and say why, right? And that's what we're talking about. This sort of works right with, hand in glove with emotional intelligence. Emotional intelligence is, do I recognize it? Do I accurately label it? Can I use that information productively, right, in myself and others? This Agile Brain is all about going a level deeper and saying, so what caused that feeling, right? Am I angry because my autonomy was taken away? Am I feeling good because I'm fully immersed? Am I feeling good because I'm exploring my potential? Am I feeling sad because I feel like I'm being treated unjustly? Like all of a sudden now we're going from symptoms down to causes, and all of a sudden we're able to talk to solutions, if that makes sense.
JD, thank you. I wanted to ask a question about how you narrowed down into the 12 different needs. And when you were doing that, did you find that there were several needs that didn't make it onto the chart, but that, as a coach, looking at the wide lens, if there are other things that come up that happen to not be in the chart, what would some of those needs be, and why or why not did you put them in the
Right.
framework?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. Thank you for that, Margot. Yes, there were some that didn't make the cut, and it's all in the peer-reviewed papers. There are some that were just so odd, and these were things that we were basically reviewing lists of drives of instinct theory from William James and Henry Murray, things from like the 1930s, the 1890s. And some of the things that they were proposing were things like the need for debasement. I need to be debased. And it's like, okay, we don't see that as a separate need. We see that as kind of a failure of maybe success. Maybe it's a fear of failure. It's a kind of a twist on that. It's sort of maybe a perversion of that need. They also were getting really super specific. They were like, people collect things. Therefore, there is a need for collecting things. And we're like, no, there is no need for collecting things. There is a need for material engagement, right? That could be some autonomy and some immersion with those things and some feeling of success related to collecting those things, and hopefully you get some recognition for having a good collection of those things. But they were kind of stuck for a while on whatever the behavior was. There had to be a specific drive to do that thing, or else the rest of their model didn't make sense. So what we've tried to do is kind of extrapolate a bit. These are kind of fuzzy concepts that relate to each other, but they're distinct enough, and we can measure them distinctly. But they do operate distinctly, and they don't. They sometimes have fuzzy boundaries because by necessity, between justice and ethics, for instance, or between autonomy and potential, and some of these things share a little bit of content, but the nice thing is they can handle almost everything that the literature has thrown at us. The only things, as I said, are those kind of oddball ones.
I have a question. This is not from personal experience, let me preface that. But I'm curious about people who you often hear about or are in abusive relationships. They get out of them and they go right back into the same kind of relationship. Why does that happen?
Yeah, that's almost how I started the whole thing. Like, why do people make the same mistakes over and over again? I think the reality of that is that's a great setup for understanding and getting a true sense of what your real emotional needs are. Because if you are using relationships as some sort of a bandage to cover over, what your real emotional need is, like maybe you feel like you can't be loved or something like that, and by being in an abusive relationship, you feel at least some connection to somebody else, even if it's abusive. And what we need to do is probably peel that back and be like, what is it in terms of your sense of psychological safety and your sense of authenticity that's missing? What is it that we can do for you there that can actually help you not need these crutches? Because it's levels. We have to kind of strip away the levels. I think a lot of people, and this is what I'm saying about really understanding your emotional needs, you have to strip away the stuff that's on the top. You have to strip away what Madison Avenue tells you want, and strip away what your friends think that it would be good for you. All of that stuff is not necessarily genuine. And once you get down to what it is that you really need, now you're going to actually make progress and hopefully, end that cycle.
Oh, we had one more question.
Quick. So, I'm looking just at the title of the book. I didn't read the book, but the word agile just, jumped at me because I hear it like every other day from my boss, and it seems like it's trending. But what do you mean by emotionally agile brain? Is that involving any quick adaptation or flexibility with emotions to the situations? Again, is the book giving some guidance
Yes.
in that space? Just
Yeah.
curious again.
That's a great question.
I guess you can advertise your book a little more
Sure.
based on this question.
Yeah, so the book basically goes through the structure and why the structure is the way it is. It kind of reviews all the different theories of motivation that are out there, theories of personality, theories of all these things, and tries to make sense of the entire thing by saying they all fit into this framework. Then we go through one domain of life at a time, 3 chapters, for the domain of the self, the safety, authenticity, potential, and repeat that for the other. And then we end up talking about, so how is it that you can get control of your emotions? And in each chapter, there's lots of questions that ask at the end of each chapter about, how is this happening in your life? How are you relating to this need? Are you aware of this need? How is it showing up? How is it complicating things for you? So there's a lot of that kind of thing. There's also some guidance in terms of how to recognize that need is activated. So it's a bridge back to emotional intelligence to say, if I'm feeling disappointed, repeatedly, then that could be a sign that I'm feeling a sense of a fear of failure, right? Or something like that, depending on what it is. It talks about theory, it talks about examples, it talks about the literature, but it also applies it to the individual person and gives them a little bit of a roadmap for how to master their emotions. Oh, the agile. So the agile, the reason I chose that word was kind of connected to the image exercise. We're showing people images for 1 second each, so it's very, very fast. So I was thinking, what's a synonym for that? There was also emotional agility as was a topic that's sort of out there. And I thought that's sort of a perfect marriage because our technique is agile. And what we're saying ultimately is if you have an agile brain, emotionally agile brain, that means you're able to step back from the noise and to say, what is it I really want, right? What is it I'm truly seeking? And then respond to that, not just the external, marketing of other needs. So I think that's what I'm saying there.